name is Cindy Marvin, and I'm the coordinator of the Community of Practice, and I will be your session host for today's talk. I'm speaking to you today from Victoria, BC, on the unceded lands of the Lekwungen-speaking peoples and the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Saanich First Nations, whose ongoing historical relationships with the land continue to this day. Our Community of Practice is part of FOCI, supported primarily by the Ocean Frontier Institute, as well as MEOPAR, a national network sponsored by the Strategic Science Fund that links top marine researchers and highly qualified personnel across Canada with partner organizations and communities. The title of today's webinar is Voices from the Coast, Risk, Resilience, and Communication with presenters Angela Antle and Michelle Brake. So we're recording this webinar, as I previously mentioned, and we will email you a link in about a week and post it on Community of Practice website at www.corkcop.com. And today's webinar is about an hour long, and we will have time at the end for questions. Please remember to keep your audio muted and your video off while the speakers are presenting. If you have a question for the presenter, please enter it in the chat at any time during the presentation. Thank you, guys. If you let people in the waiting room, that's awesome while I'm talking, because sometimes I don't want anybody stuck in there. Okay, so for today, our topic is podcasting, a mode of communication that has become increasingly popular over the past decade. And most of us have a favorite podcast that we listen to. A few of us maybe even are podcast hosts or producers, like our two speakers today. And if you could maybe put your name in the chat or the name of the podcast that you are involved in, that would be great. And podcasting can be informative, educational, and entertaining. In short, it could be an effective vehicle for knowledge mobilization, helping to build connections and community that can be helpful in context of coastal, marine, and climate-related risk communication. So we can't cover all the details in getting a podcast up and running in 1 hour, but we do have two speakers today who can give you a sense of what is involved to get started and maybe talk a little bit about why they started podcasting and what they find worthwhile about it. After our session, I will also share a list of podcasts and resources about podcasting that you might find help whet your appetite and inspire you to launch a podcast of your own. I'm so excited to welcome our two speakers today. Our first speaker will be Michelle Brake, who comes to us from Nova Scotia, where she is the Technical Marketing Manager at Esri Canada and the co-host of Geographical Thinking. There are over 100 episodes of this podcast available on a range of topics that are all linked along the theme of the value of spatial information and storytelling, something I love and appreciate as it warms my geographer's heart. Our second speaker today is Angela Antle, who has extensive experience as a writer, co-producer, and not just a podcast, but CBC documentaries in her former role with CBC. She is currently the 2025 Rachel Carson Writer in Residence at Ludwig Maximilian University of Munich and a PhD candidate at Memorial University of Newfoundland. She currently hosts GYRE, I hope I pronounced that right, a podcast that mixes art and science in storytelling with ocean and sustainability themes threading throughout. So without further ado, let's get this conversation started. And first, I will welcome Michelle, and I'll give her a moment or two to share her screen, and I'll stop sharing mine. So welcome, Michelle.
Fantastic. Thanks for the warm welcome there, Cindy. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's lovely to see you all, and hopefully you'll enjoy and get some tidbits out of what we shared today. I'm going to walk us through more of my side of the podcasting realm, which focuses on the storytelling, the ideas behind it, and some of your intentions when getting started with a podcast, and maybe even just some things you want to think about in all of your knowledge translation and mobilization work. So let's dive into it on finding your podcast voice, storytelling, and the bigger picture. So to get us started, my name is Michelle Brake. I'm the Technical Marketing Manager at Esri Canada, as Cindy said, but I'm also the host of Geographical Thinking. Behind all of the work that I do in technical marketing, my goal is to connect spatial thinking with everyday decision-making. Spatial thinking and geography is all around us in our everyday life, and so are maps and data and how we interact with them in different ways. We are data in some way. Everything we do, every little point, every bus that we take, every snowplow that we pass on the road, those are all things that come up in the work that I do. As well, I'm looking to highlight the people and ideas behind maps. I work exclusively in mapping, but this could be behind any work that you're looking to. What's the people and the ideas behind the science, behind the conservation work, behind the risk management? As well, I believe that storytelling can be used to build understanding and spark curiosity. These are three things I try to bring to all of the work that I do. And the podcast that I host is no exception. So I host Geographical Thinking. This podcast is about exploring ideas, stories, and conversations through the lens of geography. Every episode that we put out is done in partnership with my guests. And more importantly, we're looking at exploring the adventure that they're on, and I'm guiding us along the way. They're the main character. They're Luke Skywalker going on an adventure. They're Frodo Baggins in Lord of the Rings going off to Mordor. The guest is always the person that we want to shine. We want to hear what are their adventures? Where have they gotten to today? Why does it matter? What's important? So the stories, motivations, and the impacts behind the work is what we look to have take center stage. Now, this podcast started in 2020. GYRE, who is still at Esri Canada, is the original founder and host. She started it as a way to connect with the community during the times during COVID and continued extending it beyond into current times. But the main goal was to find a way that when we're not all together, how can we connect? How can we tell stories? How can we see what work is happening in a less structured technical way? So her vision for the podcast was to be able to bring forward a conversational tone, non-technical jargon, remove that side of it, and see who people are when they're communicating about things that they're passionate about. I took over hosting duties in January of 2024, so about a year and a half now that I've been at the helm and have continued to grow with it. Each host has a slightly different look and feel. We each bring different things to the table. I come from a much more technical background, but I also come from a theater background. So I bring in some of those elements along with me where rather than just having a question set going into an episode, I craft a script. It's a loose script that's mainly for myself and not so much for my guests to have to follow, but it's so that they know the guidelines that they can play in between. What are the questions I'm going to ask them? What's our opening? What's our closing? And then how they decide to go at a question is up to them. Whether they take notes and have bullet points that they want to hit, they have a written out answer that they'll glance at every so often, or they surprise me with nothing. It's up to them to then have guidelines and a safe place to explore their adventure. Currently, we're up to 103 episodes, and that's over 100 stories that have been shared from organizations that are making change around the world with real estate or climate change. But we also have our own version of a game show where we have something called Geographical Thinking caps, because you got to put your geographical thinking cap on to play. Each of these episodes is structured around a series of questions that we explore with two guests that compete back and forth with each other to see, do they know their location-based questions? An upcoming one that we'll have in a few months is going to be food-based. So for any foodies that are out there and want to give it a listen, that'll be your one. But we've done things around national park locations. We've done things around travel destinations. We've done things around winter celebrations. The goal with every episode is to bring geography in some way to the forefront. And that can take on any shape. Again, from a game show to a more structured conversation surrounding how are we looking at open data licensing? It's all within the realms of what we talk about. But the question really comes down to, how do we do this? The format that we run through is looking at 2 episodes a month. Typically, episodes have ranged historically from 15 to 50 minutes, and that's a big range, but the ideal episode is usually around 25 to 30. That's what we find gives you enough space to organically have a conversation without feeling like you need to cut things short. But sometimes that conversation gets so good that we do go into that 40, 50-minute territory. Along with this, we try to keep the conversation accessible and conversational. It's a conversation. We want it to feel like it's two people and that you're joining us for that conversation as the listener. We're not using tough topics or technical terms. When the podcast first started, they specifically made sure to not mention Esri products or technical products by name. Instead, they wanted to focus on the real storytelling. Over the years, we've gotten a little more relaxed with that rule. They say a product name, that's fine, but it's not the focus. It's a throwaway of that's how you did it, but I want to know why you did it. How did you do it? Why are the reasons? And that's where it's a tough one to balance when you're looking to find who is the right guest. Also, what's the right format? So this is where being flexible and evolving comes in. We've evolved over time as a podcast into figuring out what works. Between two hosts, we've evolved to find what works for us. And that also involves having a mix of interviews, different thematic series that we have over time, like our game show, and the occasional deep dive into a deeper subject. An example being last year, we had an episode that focused on using ecological modeling to identify lichen habitats. That one went a little bit more deep into, okay, well, how would we consider it? Like, what are some of the factors? But they're things that anybody could consider. You don't have to have a degree in microbiology to listen, because we're making sure that we're approaching it in a way that works for everybody. Some things you might want to take a quick Google. Some things we take a moment to pause and explore a little bit further. But our goal is that everything is surrounding a story. And so being storytelling driven emphasizes that stories reveal the purpose, the passion, and the challenges behind geospatial work. We're not just out here talking about maps and places. These are real things that people deal with. Every map tells a story. And there's always been this idea that, a picture's worth 1,000 words. In our world, a map is worth 1,000 pictures. There's always a lot more hidden underneath what we're looking at. In terms of our process, recording, we use a platform called Riverside. It's a browser-based application that you can get from anywhere. No need to have anything downloaded locally or pop onto a Teams or a Zoom call. The main reason we choose Riverside is because it does record each guest in their own track. So if we were to record on the Zoom call right now, if I had a dog barking in the background or a roommate who wanted to come and say, hey, what's for supper? You'd hear that. We'd have to stop. We'd have to go back, make sure we can cut them out. But if someone else is talking while that happens on my side, and maybe I didn't mute in time, we can easily cut that out because it does maintain us as separate entities on this platform. So it's pretty cool. And that's our reason why we go for it. It's not for everybody, but something to explore. Another thing that I think sets us apart in a way is that we're an audio only podcast. While we record our video, we don't use it because we want our guests to focus on what is the story and be less focused on, okay, do I look right? Is this a weird angle? What's going on in my background? And we've gotten feedback that guests really appreciate that. They're not concerned about what's happening around them. They can just be them and have a little more fun. Now, who does what? I work with a producer. His name is Toronto Mike. His name is Mike and he lives in Toronto, so it's a very apt name. He's a producer who handles all of our editing. So when we're doing calls for recording, he's on there making sure things sound good, takes some notes for editing points, handles that afterwards. Well, I take care of finding our guests, crafting our scripts, our episode content, everything else surrounding it. It's a partnership that works as he's someone who's very experienced in podcasting, has his own, does a lot of producing for other podcasts. So together, we work on putting out our podcast, Geographical Thinking. In terms of the steps that we go through to make it happen, almost every podcast episode is started with a cold email to gauge the interest of a guest. I find cool stories on the internet. I see people on LinkedIn. I find something that, you know what, that sounds cool while out on a road trip and I see a sign or a poster on a billboard in a local farm market. And I reach out, say, hey, I looked at your website. I've heard about this. This is a really cool idea. Would you be interested? That human element usually does a lot of goodwill in getting across to somebody being interested because I'm showing interest in what they're doing. This then turns into a 30-minute meeting to review questions they'll have pre-set up in advance, our script of sorts. Along with that, for them to ask questions, have introductions, get a sense of what is the story. Because while I may have thought that there's a story there, maybe someone's not comfortable. Maybe it's not going to be the right fit. Maybe we'll pivot to another format. And that's okay. It's all part of the process. From there, if everyone's happy, we move into 60-minute recording sessions, scheduled whenever makes sense for the specific guest. Then my producer and I do our editing and making up the accompanying episode content back and forth. So I always put together a link list, things that we talk about, a fun description, a catchy title. All of that comes on my side while my producer takes care of the editing. And then we send that over, get our consent forms signed once everybody's happy. And then the episode is ready for release. This is where the social media promotion comes in. Here at Esri Canada, we do promote on all of our social channels, but guests are also encouraged to promote on their own platforms because we want people to be proud and excited about sharing the episodes. Because the goal with every episode is that it's a path for them to shine and tell their story. We're just along the road for the ride. From there, all of this big process, lots of formatting things. The main thing that I always keep in mind is that good stories make good podcasts. So even if your podcast is data driven or research focused, mine's data focused, and that's a big part of it. Storytelling helps make it memorable. A clear arc, a problem, an action, a resolution can turn dry content into something that people feel. So you start with what's at stake. Why does the story matter? Who's impacted? What might surprise or inspire your listener? And think beyond interesting and aim for what's going to resonate. Now, why stories? Let's take a moment, step back, because stories are a powerful communication tool, especially in the world of GIS or research. Often we might be talking about data, and data alone doesn't tend to move people, or policy alone doesn't tend to move people. Stories, instead, are what help us connect emotionally with the people affected, the places that are being talked about, or the challenges that are being solved. That emotional hook is what makes people care. Workflows can be technical and layered, and a story helps to provide context. It helps to answer why this matters, not just how it works. And that's especially useful when talking to non-academic or non-technical folks, or even decision makers that are out in the world. Maybe someone's going to come across your podcast and say, you know what? That's an important piece of research I hadn't considered. Then that's going to be a game changer. Whether it's adopting a new tool or supporting a project or simply sharing something that people have learned, people are more likely to take action after hearing a story that resonated with them. And lastly, stories remind us that behind every map, every data set, even every analysis, there are people. Telling stories helps to bring warmth and relatability to what can sometimes feel like cold and technical content. Now, this is a big list, and I'm not expecting you to read through all these things, but these are some of the things you might consider when starting your podcast. The key things to think about are going to be, is it formal? Is it casual? Is it curious or confident? More importantly, it should sound like you, but also something intentional. Over time, your voice is going to evolve. And your intent will help give direction. This is your chance to identify the identity of your podcast. What is it? Who is it for? How do you want it to feel? And you don't need all the right answers to start, but thinking through these questions, like your purpose, audience, tone, and format, will help you start with intention. And I'll include these slides afterwards so you can look through them in more detail because there's a lot of stuff there that maybe you didn't think about before. But your choices here help to shape everything from how you structure an episode to who you invite as guests. And they'll help your podcast grow with clarity and consistency. It's not about locking in a rigid plan. It's about knowing the direction you want to head in. More importantly, the big one that I always grapple with is that success doesn't always mean downloads or going viral. Instead, success might look like building stronger relationships in your community, sharing important stories, or reaching a specific audience, or even just finishing a season that you're proud of. Whatever it is, define what success looks like for you early. It'll help guide your decisions, keep you motivated, and remind you why you started doing this when it gets busy or hard. It's okay if your definition evolves over time as well, but start with a clear idea of what impact looks like to you. And with this, keep in mind that your voice will grow over time. Some of the best podcasting happens when you're figuring it out in real time. Your voice, your perspective, your tone, your rhythm. That's not going to be fully formed at the start, and that's okay. What matters most is starting with intention and being open to growth and staying rooted in that curiosity that you have. The way you frame questions or choose guests or shape stories will shift as you learn what resonates most with your audience and with you personally. Every episode is your chance to find your footing and experiment with format. So trust your instincts. Don't wait for perfect, wait for purpose, and then press record. Because most importantly, authenticity and being you is going to be so much better than perfection. If you want to listen to what I'm talking about, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. I know I said we're an audio only podcast. We do post an audio version of it up on YouTube. And the thought I want to leave you with before we pass it over to Angela is start small, start simple, but start. Take that first step. Your perspective could be the one that sparks connection, change, or understanding. Thank you so much for your time, and we'll pass it over to get a little more into the technical side.
Thanks, Michelle. That was great. I love don't wait for perfect, wait for purpose. Don't wait for perfect when I do this switcheroo here. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Michelle. And thanks, Cindy and Joel and Meopar and Future Oceans and Coastal Infrastructures. When Cindy was talking about her podcast, I realized I didn't have a slide with my podcast on it for this podcast talk. So I quickly slid this in. This is GYRE. There's only 5 episodes. I wish I had 100, but I only have 5. I did them for my PhD, and I just got funding to do 15 more. So there'll be some more. And in those podcasts, I mix scientists and artists together to talk about, as Cindy said, sustainability issues around the ocean. And the reason I do that partially, practically, is so that they don't fall back on their sort of the language that they're used to speaking in their respective fields. They actually, because they're talking to people from another field, they actually make the information way more accessible for the listener. So, I think they're a pretty good listen. They're about 45 minutes or 40 minutes in length, which I never would have gotten away with at CBC, but I can do what I want now. So that's the podcast that I'm working on for my PhD. This is a quote that I love from Walter Murch, who's a film editor, very famous film editor. And the reason I put this up there is because the reason I was drawn to podcasting is the intimacy and persuasiveness of podcasting. It is, of all the media, I believe, the most persuasive. And part of that persuasion is baked into the physical way we listen to podcasts through our AirPods or headphones. They're in ear, they're in your body, you're moving around, there's nothing else interfering with it, like you're not in the car listening or in cooking your supper and with the family and listening. You are listening individually, and it is in the very architecture of your body, which allows for a lot of persuasion. There was a 2022 study called A Voice Inside My Head that found that neurological connections and empathy is increased when you're listening with earpods. So I use this slide a lot. This is from Pew Research Center, which is a nonpartisan U.S. research center. They found that over 1/3 of listeners have tried a lifestyle change, such as donating to a political cause or buying a book, because of a podcast. And the same study found that podcast listeners have really high trust in podcast hosts. So this is good news if you want to start, your own podcast. But it also has a downside, of course, as we saw in the most recent U.S. election, because there were a lot of extremist podcasts, which had a lot of impact on the vote, supposedly. You could read more about that online. But a lot of people trust their podcast host. 9 out of 10 expect the things they hear their podcast host say to be accurate. And we know it isn't always accurate. So over 1,000 science and health professionals wrote an open letter to Spotify to take down a Joe Rogan podcast during COVID because it was rife with misinformation. And Joe Rogan's podcast is downloaded 190 million times a month. So it's safe to say millions of people heard that misinformation. So podcasting is very persuasive. And it is largely the listenership, the growth in listenership is driven by young people. And young people have difficulty identifying disinformation or misinformation. The Canada Foundation for Innovation surveyed 1,500 18 to 24-year-olds on COVID-19 vaccines and on climate change. 84% said they couldn't distinguish true from false. So you have to keep that in mind when you're listening to podcasts, but also if you're planning on producing one. As Michelle was saying, podcast discourse is a lot more relaxed. It's a very natural way of knowledge production. It's not like being on the radio where you are, the solo voice of expertise. It's more like a conversation. It's thinking out loud with other people, sort of like when you're at a conference and your ideas are somewhat in development. It's more of a conversation. You're searching for meaning. Those are a couple of books that on the theory of podcasting and on the how and why of podcasting, if you want to check them out. And podcasting allows for more interaction with the listeners. I don't know if Michelle has done this, but the well-known podcast Serial, they changed the narrative course of their podcast based on input they got from listeners, tips and information they received. So podcasting is more of a two-way relationship built on trust. These are a couple of my favorite climate podcasts. When I started my PhD 3 years ago, there were hardly any climate podcasts. Now it's a whole genre. I'm sure you know Outrage and Optimism, hosted by three of the people who were key negotiators of the Paris Agreement. In the field of energy humanities, which I do a lot of research in that field, Cultures of Energy is fantastic. They have over 200 episodes. It's a really great way to keep up on theory and new books. Mothers of Inventions tagline is climate change is a man-made problem with a feminist solution. It centers the voices of women from around the world, and it's hosted by the former Irish President Mary Robinson and a comedian. And Drilled, up there in the left-hand corner, calls itself a true crime podcast about climate change. And if you go on their website, which is drilledmedia.org, I think, it's an amazing educational website that has all kinds of climate change information and disinformation information. And they've won a Pulitzer Prize. They're really, really fantastic. I don't know if Cindy said she had some resources, and I don't know if this is one of the ones she has, but this guide to academic podcasting, it could be for anyone. It's free, it's online, you can download the PDF. It'll save you a lot of misery if you actually look at it. There's all kinds of templates in it and a lot of great information about podcasting. So that's a little tip. And Michelle got into this a little bit, but when you start, think about what kind of podcast you want. Is it 2 or 3 people gabbing? Is it an interview, simple one-on-one interview? Is it episodic nonfiction? Is it a news podcast? Is it a branded podcast? There are so many different types to consider when you're planning your podcast. This is one of the templates from Hannah McGregor's book that I just told you about. And it just really helps you think about genre and format. So what is your genre? Education, history, geography. And what is your format? Interview, solo, nonfiction, storytelling. It's good to have all those things sort of clear before you start. This is another template from that book. And Michelle did touch on this too, but when you start a podcast or any kind of production, there's 3 phases: pre-production, production when you do the interviews, and post-production, the editing and the social media and the marketing. But it's good to have this task item, work timeline, due date, because when you start a podcast, you are also starting a workflow that will probably follow you through the project. So you want to start smart and follow a good workflow where you know where things are, you label everything correctly, you are keeping track of where your edits are, and the length of your episodes. Which of your guests has had a pre-interview, which Michelle talked about, which you have taped the interview with but haven't edited. There's so many different phases that you have to keep in mind. This is another production template, a good way to keep track of your guests. So, what's the contact information, what's the phone number. If you're doing a whole season of 10 or 12 podcasts, it's very easy to get lost in who's spoken to who for how long and how did they reach them. And if you want any of these templates, I can send them to you. Just contact Cindy and I'll pass them on. Production, is recording all your interviews, and you can do these in phases. You can do all your pre-production together, then do all your production, and then do all your post-production. That might be the simplest way, rather than every episode, separate and wait until that episode is finished and posted and then starting another one. Especially if you're creating your workflow as you go. This is I'm not going to talk about that one. This is post-production. Yeah. These are all templates that are very useful. This is another great resource. Third Coast International Audio Festival is a fantastic organization online, and they used to have a live conference, but they don't anymore. But a lot of their content is still online. And this guy was the producer of Startup. I don't know if you know that podcast, but he makes the case that the process of organization, if you are organized, you will craft a better podcast, no matter what the length. So he's all about spreadsheets, field notes, file structures, and it's all there in that article. So you can check that out. Another thing to think about is music. So you're going to have a theme song or some music, maybe as a temporal gap between interviews. And music is costly. You want to pay musicians, or you can get a subscription to something like APM Music, which is a way of still paying musicians, but you're covered rights-wise. So CBC uses APM, for example. NPR uses something called Blue Dot. So it's license-free. So you can look for the type of music you want. Maybe you want something that is, 1930s, jazz, dark. You can put in all these different, click all these different boxes and get the music you want for your theme. And you won't get fined for not paying the musician, and you'll be license free. So it's something to think about. This is a sample budget, and there's no rates in it, but you can easily look up the rate for an audio producer or an audio editor. If you want this, I use this template a lot when I'm budgeting something. I can send it to you, and that's from PRX, which is a public broadcaster. I feel like I'm going too fast, but there's so much to say. This is the first recorder that I ever used at CBC. It weighs 25 pounds. I wasn't allowed to carry it myself. You had to have a technician with you who carried it and pressed record. That was 30 years ago. Now, I record everything on my iPhone, which goes in my purse. But this was a fantastic machine to work with, but, not that portable. But the one thing that hasn't changed in 30 years is that everyone at CBC is still using the same mic. That mic is called an RE50. It's an omnidirectional mic, which means right now, if it was recording me, it would get the bird sound outside and the person who just knocked on my bedroom door. It gets all the sounds, but it is a workhorse of a microphone. It costs about $200 at Long and McQuaid, and you can drop it off a balcony and it will still work the next day. Ask me why I know that. This is a digital recording interface that I use on my phone. It's Hindenburg is the name of the field recorder. It's only available on iPhones. It's really easy to use. I think it costs about $29. It has beautiful sound quality, and it gives you that nice sound waveform to work with when you're editing. So I would recommend that I wouldn't recommend recording a podcast on the audio recorder that's in the phone. You have to get a separate app, but this is used by journalists, and it is excellent quality. I'm not going to get into how to edit, but just so you know, this is a digital audio interface. There are free ones and there are paid ones. The free DAWs are Audacity. I've used that a lot when I'm teaching podcasting, and Reaper is another one. They're all very similar timelines. So in the case of this one, you can see the music, the theme comes up. There's a little bump there, and then the host says, "Welcome to our podcast," blah blah blah, and introduces the guest. And then there's a little bit of guest, another question from the host. You can sort of see how it works. They're very easy to learn. When I teach podcasting at MUN, the students already know how to use it, even though they've never recorded audio. This is a solo casting studio. So this, you can use this setup to do a podcast. I've used this. Mainly this microphone is decorative. I mean, it works, and everyone seems to like them because they have that kind of retro look. They're not that great, and it's a USB connection, and that's why they're not so great. So what I would recommend is something with an XLR connection. So down on the bottom there, you see the 3 prongs. That is a professional microphone, and it snaps into place and it doesn't fall out. But also it is, you won't get any crackle or hiss noise. So if you use a USB microphone, you will get, that kind of hissiness. And the red box is called a Focusrite box. And it converts, this is as technical as I'm going to get, the analog electrical impulses captured by the mic into that digital audio waveform. And if this box that I use, this Focusrite, has 2 XLRs, so I can use 2 microphones. So I can have one and the guest can have one. If you have plans to have more than 1 guest at a time, you can buy one of those red boxes with 4 XLR inputs. And these things aren't expensive. They're available at Long and McQuaid. Or you can just use this Zoom, or Tascam has a similar one that has 4 outputs for microphones, 2 on each side. And that way you can have more than 1 guest. I would never advise using the internal microphone, the little thing on the top of that image. But this is actually a very good device because you can see your sound, how hot your sound is on the bottom as well. Michelle just told us about a similar platform to this that you can use to record people. I used to use this. Now I just use Zoom because it has such good audio when I'm, phoning someone or interviewing someone away. But I do ask people to turn off their cameras because, like Michelle said, people, I think, are more likely to forget themselves and not be self-conscious, and actually come across much more authentic and thoughtful when they're not worried about how their hair looks, or they're not worried about other things. So, but if they're just listening to you with their earpods and listening to your questions and talking, it ends up being a much more natural conversation. This is another old CBC. I love this machine even more. This one recorded on cassettes. And I just wanted to talk to you about room tone with this. So never, if you ever have a machine, never put it on max. Like that one is turned up to 9. You're only going to get a lot of hiss and pops and distortion if you're up that high. Room tone is when you go to someone's office or you sit in a cafe and you interview someone. You're going to edit that conversation, and there's going to be gaps, and the sounds won't match up unless you have recorded 1 minute at least of just the sound in that room or the sound in that cafe. You're going to have to ask them to turn off the radio, but the sound of the street and the birds in the trees, whatever. Then you have a bed with which to edit. So when you have gaps in the conversation, you can slide that sound under, and it makes for a much more natural sound. I'm not going to get into what are decibels. And do we have time to get into the types of interviews? Cindy, I haven't been timing myself.
Yeah, let's see, 10:40. Yeah, sure. I mean, I think if we leave ourselves 15 minutes for questions, that should be good. So go for it. Another 4 or 5
So
minutes.
all I'm going to say about interviewing is listening, as Michelle said. Give your guest a lot of room to talk. Don't jump in with an anecdote or even agreement. Like really just try to, I become a nodder because that is a kind of an interruption, and you can edit it out after, of course, if you interrupt, but it does stop the train of thought of your guest. And you want them to go deep. You want them to go deeper. Silence is your friend. Like everyone is uncomfortable with silence and wants to jump in to fill the silence, including you, the host. But don't let the silence hang there, and the guest will fill it. Or, if they don't, you can say, tell me more about that. Or do you have an example? And be willing to blow up your question line, because it's much more important to listen to what the person said in the response to a question than to follow what the next question you have written down is. It's much more important for it to be a conversation. You can go back at the end and go through your list of questions and say, oh, I didn't ask this one, and then edit it together to make it sound natural. But it's way more important to listen to what your guest is saying and respond accordingly. And there's always this moment at the end of an interview when you turn off the recorder and you say, okay, thank you so much. That was excellent. This always happens. People say, well, really, here's the real story. Or they think of some example because like the pressure is off, the thing is over. And that's when you say, oh, this is really great. I'm just going to turn, you have to let them know you're still recording. I'm just going to turn the recorder on again. I really want to capture this. This is so interesting. Psychologists call this the doorknob moment. So like after a whole hour with your psychologist, you are leaving, you say thank you, and then you tell them what the real problem is. It happens in interviews as well. So you want to be ready for that. And you want to say, okay, this is great. Just a second, I'm going to turn on record. Can you just tell me that again? That's all I'll say about interviews. And I have all kinds of resources. I can pass them on through Cindy, but the Amplify Podcast Network book I told you about, the Third Coast Audio Festival is amazing. And there's an organization called transom.org, like a transom window. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Angela, and also Michelle. That was fantastic. Wow. I think you covered some really great material, and certainly, filled in a lot of blanks for me in terms of, questions that I had about podcasting. So I really, really appreciate both of you for sharing all of that knowledge and also those resources. And I'll make sure that I add those to the list that I've started, and then I can share them with our guests. So now I'm just going to open it up to any of our guests here who might like to ask some questions of Michelle or Angela. And I'll just start. I see one here. I think it's from Pam, who says, in which situation would you use your phone to record an interview for a podcast? Is it when you're just inserting someone's comments as part of a storytelling podcast? So I'm not sure which of you want to answer that, or both of you.
I'm not sure if I understand if that's like a technical audio question or of a content question.
Yeah, I don't know, Pam. I think this might be from Pam Sullivan. Would you like to clarify? Is that an audio question, or give her a moment? You're free to turn on your audio if you'd like to answer in audio. More of an audio, she said.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for this. This is really cool. I think because I've done such limited work in podcasting so far, and the type of podcasts I do, I just do conversational back and forth, use Riverside, have one other guest who, I bring into Riverside, and we just have a casual back and forth chat. People working in the world of climate work,
Yeah.
that I just couldn't think, and I'm sure it's going to be obvious, but I'm a journalist type myself and I don't mind asking dumb questions.
There are no dumb questions. I would
Again,
use
it's
a
my limited
phone.
experience podcasting when you use a phone. So could you explain it? Because I have my mic and I've got my headset on and they're sitting in front of their laptop using, presumably, hopefully a decent mic. So what kind of podcasts are you using, like your phone to record what kind of interview?
Yeah, so I would use the Hindenburg app on my iPhone if I was face to face with someone, and that was the only option. It is a
Okay.
good option. That's all. I mean, it's not the best, obviously. It would be better if you had a microphone and one of those little digital recorders like a Tascam. That would be optimal. That's what I did as a CBC reporter. But yeah,
Oh, okay. And that's my limited experience in this.
and Michelle, I think, had something to say about it too.
Yeah, I
I,
will say.
I can't meet somebody, let's say out at a park and do any kind of podcasting because I'm not going to be able to haul my microphone with me and plug it in. But it's good to know that I can do that if I don't mind having background noise of birds and I can kind of lower that in the software, like lower the background noise a bit, I assume. Um, and then in the quality comes out pretty good as well.
Yeah, I mean, test it. I'm not, I don't get a fee or anything for talking about Hindenburg, but test it
Yeah.
out with a friend first so that you know what it sounds like. Yeah.
And that's what we
Oh,
do.
okay. And it's called
So
Hindenburg,
Hindenburg. Yeah, like the thing that blew up. Hindenburg.
Michelle, you
like
had
the thing
something.
that blew up. Okay. So,
Michelle, you had something to add to that?
yeah, so we also use Riverside as our recording platform, but devices vary. Like I talk to people that they're using little headphones and that mic, they're using their phone, they're calling in on their laptop. Microphones aren't always the top of the line quality because I'm talking to people that are willing to tell the story.
Yeah.
So that comes with a lot of range of what you get for sound.
Yeah,
So we always
absolutely.
do a check of, okay, what do you have available to you? Do you have a couple different types of little headset earbuds? Great. Let's do some testing. Let's walk through it.
right.
Let's check and see what our options are. So we always give ourselves about 5 to 10 minutes for that troubleshooting at the start. And that's where being able to just listen and have that time. So sometimes it might be a cell phone and you're going to get a bit of background noise. And then it's just what's acceptable for you. I'm unfortunately for my producer who does our editing, a very like I don't like a lot of background noise. So then we have to like if there is a snowplow going by where I am, that's a pause for snowplow moment. But you might like that outdoor ambiance noise. And that's just being aware of what do you like and what don't you like. Is it great if there's a fire truck going by? You pause, you retake that bit. But if bird sounds and like the occasional outdoor sound is fine, then it meets your needs. It doesn't have to be fancy. You can meet
Mhm.
yourself where you're at currently.
Mhm.
I guess that's the advantage of having something that's pre-recorded versus live, because
Yeah.
you can pause, you can then and then you can edit afterwards. And I guess a question I guess that I would have would be how much of that could you turn down? I guess that depends on how
Mhm.
many tracks you're recording on, I suppose. So you didn't put the fire truck on a separate track, for example, I suppose. So you can't really take that out. You just have to cut it out altogether. Okay.
I know on our side, it's always a go back and re-record that bit. So
Right.
like guests, if they fumble something or they want to go back and retake a section, they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
So we have to do for the audio purposes, we can. Angela, what do you find on your end?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can always call someone back and ask another question. I mean, I don't do that a lot, but if there's something glaring that is wrong or that you forgot to ask, it's called a pickup interview. Yeah.
So can I just ask another question about Hindenburg? So is it like you've got your phone and you have to be face to face, so your internal mic on the phone works with Hindenburg, the program, to pick them up, or is that a phone call through using Hindenburg on your phone?
No, not a phone call. It's face to face. So if you were at a
Face to face. Okay, that's what I
we're at a
thought.
conference, for example, and there's 10 people there you want to have on your podcast, and
Yeah.
it's going to take 6 months to organize all their timelines to get the interviews. Go around with Hindenburg and do all the interviews.
Okay, that's really cool. So as long as Hindenburg's pretty good at picking up people's voices. And does Hindenburg let you, sorry, I feel like I'm monopolizing this, but I'm very curious about this now. Does it let you go in and actually edit specific tracks? So like their tracks or the background noise track, or do you have to go in and do that in a separate piece of software?
Okay, so it only records on one track, so you and the person will be on the same track. So that's a
Oh,
disadvantage.
okay. Oh,
But it's very easy to share the track to your, computer or to your editing interface.
yeah.
It's really easy, unlike GarageBand, where it's impossible to get those files out of GarageBand. Yeah.
Oh, okay. But you can't separate the two tracks once you're in a different, if I'm in Audacity, I can't separate the two tracks, can I?
No, you
No.
just have to chop everything up. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you.
Super. Thanks so much. And thanks for your questions, Pam. That's great. I'm sure you probably answered a lot of other people's, like some of the questions I had as well. So does anyone else have any questions for our speakers or any comments or a favorite podcast maybe that you listen to or something along that line? If not, let me see. I do have some other questions. So we have a minute or
Well,
two
I
for,
do.
oh,
Can I just jump in with a question?
okay.
So, and so for Angela, I know you
Okay.
mentioned and you teach at MUN and you worked on
Mm.
CBC for a long time. So I was going to be taking a podcasting class at King's here in Halifax with, I just forgot her name. She was at CBC when I did a contract there and I can't remember her name. Really nice.
Pauline Dakin.
Pauline Dakin, yeah. So it got canceled, I think, because of all the problems at the border, the states. So it's being pushed. And I was going to ask about this. So in my style of podcast, I follow what I like to listen to myself. So I really like conversational podcasts where there's back and forth and people tell anecdotes, and it's really what I like. And I'm listening to a really good BBC ghost story one right now, which is really spooky. But I typically like the back and forth, whether it's celebrities that I like and I find it funny, or, Conan O'Brien, or, I mean, I listen to a bunch, but so my own podcast that I do for Climate Stories Atlantic, I try to do that a bit, like it's quite casual, and I don't cut people off and I let them finish their thought, but I definitely my style is to kind of intervene. So I spoke with the mayor of Bridgewater, who's a really great guy, really progressive, kind of climate conscious guy, and easy to talk to. And he was, talking, it kind of went off, and he was talking a little bit of tangent about their K9 vehicle, which is going to be an EV or hybrid or something. And I was like, K9 as in dog? And he's like, yeah. And so we started talking a little bit about what kind of dog. And I said, I have a Scottish Terrier. I can't imagine he'd be much of a K9, tracker. Like, and people who have listened to it have really liked that. They've liked the more personal, but I in no way cut him off. And I just kind of let the conversation go. And because I'm kind of a person who just likes to chat with people, even if I meet them at the grocery store, but I'm respectful of them. I think that there's probably a place for a certain style of podcast like that, but you were saying you shouldn't give anecdotes or anything like that. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, what I meant by that was simply just let people, give people space because you're featuring them. But yes, a podcast is definitely more relaxed and it is more of a conversation. That's all. That's all I meant by that.
Oh,
I,
okay.
I was in my CBC head and thinking about, doing a more formal interview. But yeah.
Okay, okay. I was just wondering if there's some way I should kind of like limit how much I do that, or I kind of go with my gut.
Sounds like it's working, Pam.
I don't know. Who knows? That's my last question for you guys. How do you get your podcast out and get attention for it? It's so hard. Anybody?
I'll let Michelle answer that.
Yeah, so I'm fortunate that I adopted a podcast. I didn't have to start it from scratch, and we do have like our own social media already out there. But there's always that constant, how can we push it further? Where can we go? So we don't monetize our podcast. So we're not getting AdSense. We're not getting that same promotional push that some other organizations get for their podcasts. Instead, a lot of ours does rely on word of mouth and natural organic growth. So that comes into sharing, that comes into being out there. That's getting guests to also want to share the content. So developing what is that voice from the start will help you. we are looking into what are some other things we can do. So is it doing more cross collaboration with other podcasts so that we can both get that promotion? We are looking into those areas, and it's finding those people that'll help be an advocate for your podcast. But it is always an ongoing struggle and challenge.
Right. Thank you. Okay.
So we have another, thank you so much, Pam. We have another comment here, a question. I think it'll probably be one of our last ones we can take. So this one comes from Joel, and he says, I'm thinking a little about podcasting and risk communication, and it strikes me that a degree of audience trust is a real advantage here, something that both meteorologists and climate scientists have been chasing forever. Do you think this would translate for organizations like Environment and Climate Change Canada or the Weather Network, or is that trust tied to the underdog, amateur, just a regular person nature of many podcasts?
That's a great question, Joel. But if you think about people like Joe Rogan, there's nothing underdog about him, and he has the world's most popular podcast. No matter what you think about his content, I think that trust could definitely work with. Well, I mean, I'm doing a climate change podcast because of that. The only thing I can think of that might interfere is that a podcast is evergreen. It's there for a long time, whereas risk management might be specific to an event, a climate event. So you just have to keep that in mind if you were doing a podcast about, say, for example, the storm that hit Port aux Basques, and all the damage that it did. It's not a news oriented medium. It's more the conversation after an event, and that is evergreen. It's going to be up online for a long time, so you just have to contextualize it. But yes, I think the trust could really work to your advantage.
Great, thank you. Michelle, did you have anything to add to that, or do you?
I think I agree that there's a lot of trust put into people that are willing to put themselves out there and make media. There is inherently that relationship that's built with your audience where they want to believe you.
Yeah.
They're not there to immediately challenge you. They want to think that you're doing the best with them in mind. So going into it with trust and doing your due diligence as a creator does have a big step. And for organizations like ECCC or the Weather Network, you have credentials behind those people. So being able to explore those and having those be open does help to build that trust. But it's always going to be an ongoing process that people want to believe the best in you. So make sure that you have the best in mind for them.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I guess I just like to add with risk communication, another element that helps with it is the storytelling aspect and reaching people through heart as well as mind, because, as you pointed out, reaching people with data and charts and things like that is one thing, maybe jargon, which confuses people. But when you reach out to people with storytelling, it's a really good way to get messages across, whether it's coastal hazards information, or whether it's climate risk or adaptation efforts that maybe your organization is undertaking, that kind of thing. So I think podcasting could be, I'm kind of sold on it. I think it could be a good medium for this. Anyway, it looks like we've reached our time. It's 11 o'clock in here on the West Coast. So we've had our hour, but I would really like to thank both of you so much for the time and effort you put into this. And it's just been really informative. We really appreciate it. And and I'd love if you feel free to, if you're interested in sharing your slides with us, I'll make sure they get posted on our website. And I'll also send out to all the registrants a list of the resources that that you've mentioned and some that I have as well. So anyway, thanks again so much. And I really appreciate all of the participants who've come and listened. And I hope you've gained some really cool and useful knowledge about podcasting.